Well, maybe not good evening where you are. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Matthew Stibber. I'm founder and CEO at Articulate Marketing. I can see a few people joining or coming through the door. Thank you. This is going out live. It's just gone 5 o'clock here in the UK on a dark and cold evening. I'm here with my two Labradors, so if you hear sort of noises off, barking and growling, and it's not me, it's them. I am going to be talking about our findings from an analysis of more than 300 websites, and particularly 20 top websites, so that you can get some top insights about how to make a brilliant website in the sustainability and environment sector, which is an area that we particularly like to work in. So without any further ado, I'm going to get started. By way of introduction, I run Articulate Marketing. These are my lovely colleagues. We have been around more than 20 years. We've helped hundreds of companies help make the world a better place. We do websites, branding, content, and HubSpot automation. Quick plug, I've got a couple of webinars coming up in December, which I would love it if you would attend. They're all free. You can get more information about those webinars at articulatemarketing.com/webinars. And if you're attending this, no doubt we'll be emailing you about them. If you would like to know more about the topics I'm covering and deep dive into any of the things that I'm going to mention, this report is the detailed version of the webinar, and it's dozens of pages, and it's got the full list of 300 websites that we ended up analyzing. When you are watching this video tomorrow morning now, we'll be sending out a thank you email with a link to this presentation, and I probably will put a link to this report as well. But when you get the PDF, if you click on download report, it will take you to the report. Or you can email me, Matthew at Articulate Marketing, or reply to the invitation for this webinar. They will come into my inbox, and I will happily send you a copy by return. If you'd like to have a conversation with me, or you have any questions about what's coming up today, you can email me, Matthew at articulatemarketing.com, or articulatemarketing.com/meet, MEET. That is my online calendar. I'd love to talk to you. I'm not having live chat on this because I'm doing this on my own, and it's enough juggling all the windows and all the technology to get everything. Right, okay, enough of that. Let's get to webinars, to websites. So we're going to cover how we did the report, what were the top 20 websites out of the 300 that we looked at, what we loved about them, what is needs improving and perhaps pitfalls to avoid, and what we learned and how you can apply that to your own website. So let's get into the methodology. Fundamentally, we went and compiled out of our database and from various other sources a list of 300 websites that we thought were interesting in the environment and sustainability sector, broadly, across the English-speaking sort of UK, Ireland, US and Canada, which are target markets for us. So that's where we went, and we ran a number of tests and tools over those websites, initially looking at things that we could measure, like loading speeds and SEO impact, SEO backlinks and things like that. We looked at word counts, readability and sentiment on the site. So we ran a battery of tests. For the short list that mathematical data-driven process produced, we then did a much more deep professional analysis and looked at verbal branding and visual branding and how the website was built and things like that. So long list of 300 from using data, short list of 20, and the 20 were these. I bet you can't read that on the screen share. Number one was Octopus Energy, the green energy supplier, and one of our former clients up there, Ecology, got into the top 10. Yes, number 17. BSI, number 16, British Standards Institute, just down the road from me when I used to live in Chiswick. You can see this list and the full 300 on the report. Okay, so what did we find? First of all, unsurprisingly, we felt that design matters. There is a value with all websites, but particularly with communicating complex topics to simplicity and cleanliness of design. And the broader your market, the more important design and clarity becomes. If you're Octopus Energy and you are trying to sell to the millions of UK households, you need to be pretty approachable. If you're selling a very sophisticated B2B software product, you might want to be visually identifying and communicating with them, but clarity still matters. It's also true with language. We found that the best websites had copy that was easy to read, relatively short sentences, short paragraphs, short powerful words. They had strong language for calls to action. They made their point very clearly. And this is as important for complex topics as for simple ones. One of the highlights of my journalistic career back in the day was interviewing Dr. Chang Diaz, who is an astronaut and the designer of rocket engines. So, genuine genius. And what was fascinating about him was that he was able to distill very complicated concepts to me, communicate them to me in everyday, approachable language. And I think this is the job of a good writer and the job of a good website. So clarity really wins all the time, and it's very easy to fall into talking about your stuff in your language with your word, and perhaps leave people a little bit confused, alienated, bored, especially online when people don't have a lot of attention. Even with the top 20, there were questions, concerns, problems, and things that could be improved. Even in the top 20, SEO could be improved. Certainly loading speed is an issue. And accessibility seems to be a common problem with websites. When you run them through Google PageSpeed Insights, a lot of websites don't load quickly enough and fails on some level, some accessibility tests. So that's what we found. Read more in our report. So let's talk about what we loved. We love it when companies use playful, memorable language, especially if it's the kind of thing that it's quite hard to get out of ChatGPT. There's a sort of a homogenization and a blancmangification of language at the moment. And I think, don't get me wrong, I'm not an AI Luddite, but people respect and react to well-written, human-written copy, especially on key pages of the website. And I think that starts with getting your messaging, your personas, and your tone of voice right. Also, websites that tell a story seem to do well. So you can use the scrolling mechanism, or you can use gentle animation. For goodness sake, don't use carousels or sort of in-your-face videos and things that are distracting for people. But you can communicate and tell a story. That's very powerful. Think about the beginning of a TED talk that you like. They tend to start with a story rather than facts or sort of data things. Some sites use social proof really well, and I think that is a tool that can be very, very effective. Podpoint here, for example, has some Which and various other sorts of things. Trustpilot is a common one in B2C. That could be done more, I think, in this sector. Trustpilot again on ecology here. It's interesting that I think Ecology's always had a very nice website, despite our best efforts to improve it, or pitch an improved website to them, shall I say. We didn't build this, we helped with some HubSpot stuff with them. But I suspect, I don't know this, they haven't told me, I suspect that Climate Action You Can Trust is talking to a why that matters to people who are buying CO2 offsets and CO2 removal project credits, in that there's been quite a lot of greenwashing, quite a lot of skepticism, quite a lot of dodgy projects and dodgy accounting in the sector. So being able to authenticate that's very, very important. The other trust point here is 24,000 businesses, including Articulate, use Ecology for those services. And again, this confidence building probably is quite important. That's their so what, perhaps. User experience is also important, and I think companies that make it very clear what they want you to do next and use visual design, use language, use animation perhaps to get that to happen. If you have a website that just says contact us, people tend not to take a lot of action. So be really clear about your user journeys, your signposting, and where you want people to go next. Okay. Where websites use typography really well, that can stand out. I was talking to a prospective client this morning who said, our brand guidelines specify open sans, along with probably 1.5 million other websites. Just try to go a little bit outside the comfort zone and pick a font that is, perhaps a little bit more unusual that can help you differentiate. You don't have to go and have a custom font design specially for you to be unlike most other sites. And I'm an Octopus customer, so that pink octopus brand character works quite well. We have opinions about brand characters, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. We had a brand robot for a while called Artie, now sadly off in robot heaven being retired, but it can be a bit twee, but it can really help differentiate if you can find some visual way of doing that. So Oddbox does that with hand-drawn lettering and so on. So there are different ways of doing it. We liked very much how Greenly was using the colour green for highlighting. That was really nice. It was very vibrant, contrasting colour. Ecology uses a bit of peach. Have an interesting, secondary palette, I think is the answer here. For example, on Articulate, we have a very sort of vibrant orange that we use sparingly but effectively, where the rest of our site is this rather appealing OTPG pale pallid colour. So spots of colour can really help. Okay, it's really hard in the environmental sort of sector to get away from lots and lots of pictures of green stuff, nature in all its glory. It can be a bit of a cliche. I think it's important to try to curate images well. If you can have a palette or a library that is more distinctive, maybe consider paying a little bit of money for non-free stock photography, or even better, hiring a photographer or commissioning a photographer. Back in the day, a long time ago, we were doing a website for a company called Graphcore that is in AI, and I had been to see an exhibition of a photographer who took these aerial photographs, which now you see all over the internet. But we actually commissioned him and licensed some of his pictures to use on that version of that website. And it was quite a nice, it was geometric, which suited what they were doing with neural networks, without it being the generic cliche of some dots and lines that you see on a lot of AI or tech websites. However, that overhead green photography now has become such a cliche, don't use it. I would also suggest that using AI to generate imagery is problematic. It's hard to get something that isn't just a rounded pebble and smooth and bland. So let's come on to what needs improving. What could be made better? What can we learn from these 20 and these 300 websites that you can easily avoid doing? It's always better to learn from other people's mistakes or opportunities. Right. Very common to write stuff, and we're not particularly calling out this site, to write stuff that is not clear what you're saying, and that little bit above the fold on the homepage particularly has to be really, really spot on, and it has to be talking to the reader about their language, in their language, about their issues, the problems you solve for them. What can you do for me? And I think if you write copy for the website that is designed to get your boss or the highest paid person in the room to sign off on it, that is a mistake. And it's often the thing that clients value less about the work that we do, but probably the thing that has the highest value of the work that we do is just being able to go, well, that might be what you want to say, but that's not the best way of saying it or communicating it. So that outsider's view can be incredibly helpful when you're writing. I've talked about this a little bit already, but just because you're in this sector doesn't mean that you have to have green as your primary language. It can communicate some subliminal messaging, and that's okay, but it can also make your site look like everybody else's site, and that's not great. One of the things that we often do when we're doing a website strategy project is we'll benchmark our client against 5-10 of its competitors, and we'll do a color wheel, and we'll say, look, 8 people are down here, and there's all these other colors that your competitors are not using. So maybe, if they're all going green, you want to go purple. And then there are times when you actually do want to look like everybody else, and you want to blend into the pack, but mostly for marketing, you want to differentiate. It's surprising how, perhaps for a socially conscious sector, accessibility seems to be a lower priority than it could be. When you run through the scanners, we're finding sites that are getting unreasonably low scores. And I will admit something. I'm in my 50s now, and for most of my life, I've sort of had a distant relationship with the concept of accessibility. Accessibility is for somebody else's problem. Not entirely, but this is, and then as I've got older, my eyesight's been getting worse, and it really bugs me when people put really small text on the website. And I wouldn't in any way classify myself as disabled because I have, poor eyesight. But accessibility has value for lots and lots and lots and lots of people. It isn't just for, it's you put in an alt tag for readability for people who are using screen reader. Great, that takes care of a particular disability. But it actually can also be useful if the site is loading slowly and the text appears while the image is loading. It has value. I've done webinars about accessibility before, and it's something that's important to us. And it's very easy when you're designing a website and thinking about design. You do these beautiful mood boards and wireframes, and everyone's focused on the look and the feel of it. And then, some website developers, if they've got the design approved and the code built, the accessibility is at best an afterthought, and it really should be built in from the beginning. It's related to accessibility, but actually this particular thing here with One Tree Planted is common for websites all over the place. It's where you have a banner image on the homepage or on any page, and then you overlay text onto it, and that text becomes very hard to read. And I was looking at a particularly egregious example of this the other day, from a company that had an animated of like a video playing in the banner area, and then they had Grow a Greener Future that had that sort of text over the top of it, and most of the time the visual noise of this animation, which was very fast cut, and very different colours and stuff, about half the time you couldn't actually read the headline, and that defeats the object of the most important real estate on your website. So think about how you can get the contrast to make sure that all that text is readable. I mean, they could use here a tint or a background or a call out, or they could put, there's lots of ways of doing this, but text on top of an image is probably not one of them. And then there are sort of slightly random typography choices, like getting the hierarchy of the fonts wrong, which makes it quite hard to read. Picking out BSI here, but there are other examples. And also having text that is fonts that are visually impressive but actually hard to read. So there's quite a lot of studies around this. There's some fonts that are very sort of rounded, where all the A's and B's and O's all have the same sort of radius. And actually, that's quite hard to read on a screen. People skip and jump around reading through stuff. So font choice and font hierarchy and heading hierarchy and layout matter a lot if you don't want people to close the window, abandon the view, not read on, if you want to make it easy for them to read rather than hard to read. And my personal plea, bigger text, make the text bigger. Okay, so how do you stand out? I've got a few lessons of ways that you can really maximize the differentiation. One of them is tone of voice. About 60% of the sites were what you might call professional. Bland, boring, rather grown up, serious. And the other 40% were playful. And we have analytical tools to look at this. A lot of clients, when we talk to them, they want to be professional. And I did a webinar last week about tone of voice, and so I've got opinions about this, and you're very welcome to go hear them. Too professional is boring. Too professional is just the rounded pebble. Too twee and cartoony is actually, in some cases, also a bit wrong. Not everybody has to be innocent drinks, who do a lovely job of being cute and well written, but it's good for them and not necessarily for everybody. And actually also very hard to pull off, to do it consistently. So it's really important to have a very structured approach to messaging and tone of voice and language use, so that you have a consistent voice and it is differentiated without being boring and without being overly compromised and rounded. Confidence is also important. Some of the best sites actually use numbers and facts and data and evidence and pull that out. I think if you want an example of a site that does this really well outside the sector, if you go look at Apple, they'll typically have a headline that's quite sort of paradoxical or cute or clever. And then they will tell you why that claim is substantiated, and have lots of numbers and data points, and it's 20% faster than last year's model, and it's got an A18 in it. So they're using these sorts of numbers to substantiate, to prove the claims that they're making. This is very powerful. And just thinking about Articulate's work, we've started putting numbers a little bit more forcefully on our website, the number of projects we've done, the number of websites we've launched, just as confidence building measures. A related point about data-backed confident messaging is it's really important to show the benefit in tangible ways if you can. So ROI calculators or price return calculators, or trees saved per pound calculators. I think Ecology does a really nice job of this on their customer portal. It does a dashboard of how many trees have been planted on your behalf and how many tons of CO2. I'm surprised they don't surface that more visibly on their homepage, because it must be many, many millions of trees now. I am a big fan of simplicity. Make things as simple as possible, but no simpler, I think Einstein said. And Kelly Johnson, who is a famous aeroplane designer at the Lockheed Skunk Works, used to go around his engineers, his designers, and he would say to them, simplicate and add lightness, which I always thought was a lovely paradoxical phrase, and I brought it in here. If you can bring some focus and clarity by cutting the number of words, by using less noise or less busyness or fewer imagery, or finding the right quote. Quotes are a really good example of this. Let's talk about that. So if you've got customer case study quotes or customer evidence or something like that, 90% of websites that deploy that use big blocks of text with like multi-sentence quotes. You need to cut that down to 3 to 6 words and a little picture or logo, right? Just find the bit that, not the bit that tells the story, but the bit that conveys the emotion. So simplicate and add lightness. Just a couple more things, and then we'll come to a conclusion. I've got quite a few more things. I'll try to finish this up in the next 5 minutes, okay? But thank you for your patience if I go a few minutes over. So adding functionality is great. If you can give people something they can interact with on the site, and some of these sites that we mention here actually have some really nice tools and things that you could draw you in. It's surprising how many websites and businesses in this area will use a word mark, so just the name of the company rather than a visual logo. And it's tempting to do that, it's understandable, but people have a bit of their brain that is tuned into logos and visuals, and if you can actually get a visual and a word mark, that can be much more powerful. It also solves the problem of what you do with that little square on LinkedIn. If you've got a word mark, you've basically got an unreadable bit of text in that social media box. So that's a pretty strong recommendation about how to go about designing a logo. I've talked a little bit about fonts already, but mix different kinds of fonts, find more expressive fonts and avoid fonts that are hard to read on a screen. Be bolder in the design choices. It doesn't have to look like everyone else's website. And Ecosia here has some really nice stats. You know, they 232 million trees planted. You know, I'm feeling guilty. I don't use it more. Okay. Resource hubs is something that we get frustrated with. It's quite easy to have a resources hub, you know, where you have your blogs and your white papers and your case studies. And Articulate is still in this category a little bit, but we're working on solving it, where the content is categorized by the format. So all the webinars sit here, all the blogs sit here, all the case studies sit here, and this is what you can find, when actually what people want is they want to come to a website and go, what's your best content, your best information, advice, expertise for this problem? I am a CEO looking for a website developer. How do you know? Tell me what you've got for that. Or I am a CFO looking for a way to achieve to buy reliable carbon offsetting. How do I do that? So organize the resources hubs around readers' questions and needs rather than the categories and formats that you're hosting. If I could wave a magic wand and fix one thing about websites in the environmental and sustainability sector, is the painful use of cliche imagery. There are really powerful images of nature, of the environment that you can use. There are also many really bland, cliched, trivial, stupid images. That's probably true for every website actually, but it's more prone in this sector. And lastly, I think pay more attention to conversions, conversion rate optimization, calls to action. Again, this is true of almost all websites, but the more effective you can make the website at telling people what the next step in the journey is and incentivizing that and making it relevant, useful, valuable and interesting, the better. It takes work, but Contact Us is a pretty poor conversion offer. There are better and more interesting ones than that. So that brings us neatly, trippingly to the half-hour point and almost the end of the webinar. Just a brief reminder, do please come along to one of these in December. They're a little bit more broad marketing topics, talking about context enrichment and AI and clever things in HubSpot. This is the #1 request that we get from people when we talk to them about HubSpot, contact enrichment and segmentation. And then I'm going to be preparing a really interesting webinar about thought leadership and what you have to do in next year to stand out and differentiate yourself from all the AI slop. Again, don't forget to go download this report and get in touch with me. I'd love to hear from you. Book a meeting, send me an email. Just if you enjoyed this or you didn't enjoy it or you'd wish I'd covered something else, I'd love to hear from you. Any feedback's valuable. That is the end. Thank you very much for staying with me throughout. I can see one or two people leaving. I am now done. Have a wonderful, wonderful day and a wonderful week ahead.